Hey there, you lovely people. Thank you so much for joining me again in the Holy Shed. You are most welcome. And an added welcome to Lent in the Holy Shed. Um, my old spiritual director once told me that he thought of Lent as a time to take better care of himself, which I thought was a pretty helpful and positive way to go at it. Often it's identified so often with kind of negative feelings of giving things up and you know beating yourself about a little bit more than usual. But anyway, this Lent in the Holy Shed, I suggested last time that we're going to be making How to Be a Bad Christian, my book, How to Be a Bad Christian and a Better Human Being, our Lent book. It's what we're doing at St Leonard's, our church in Streatham in South London. So I thought, hey, why not do it here as well? So if you have got a copy of the book, that's great. And if you'd like to get one, well, you can buy it in the usual way on Amazon, or you could get it from the shop on my coffee site, and that way you'll get a signed copy. And if you message me telling me who you'd like to dedicate it to, we'll do that and get it off to you as quickly as possible. Now, I'm not going to be reading much of the book out loud here in the shed, because you've got the book and you can do that for yourself. But my idea is really to talk about some of the themes in the book and what lay behind them when I wrote them, and maybe tell you some stuff that isn't included in the book, things that have happened since. I wrote it 12 years ago. Time flies. So a lot's happened. Would I write the book again? Would I change it? Hey, I think as soon as a book is off to the press, I would change it. But that's only fiddle faddling around because, I'm a bit of a messer when it comes to writing. But broadly speaking, no, I think that the book as I wrote it then still stands very much as something that I feel pleased about. So for today, I asked if you would read the first 3 chapters of the book, which you may or may not have done. But before we get to that, when I first proposed the idea of How to Be a Bad Christian to my publisher, we met up, me and my editor and the manager of the department, for a very pleasant lunch. But then I discerned that there were furrowed brows beginning to develop about the title. And I was asked, how wedded are you, Dave, to that title? Well, pretty wedded, I said, because, it's a pretty specific title. And if it's not that title, well, it'll be a completely different book. The fear was that the word Christian would be off-putting to non-Christians, who, I should say, were a big part of my target audience, and then that bad would be a turn-off to poor, fragile little Christians. But I knew that there was absolutely no need to fear. I mean, I'd tried it out. I'd done my own little bit of research. I'd tried it out on, churchy friends, on non-religious people, on out-and-out atheists too. And, every time it drew a smile or a laugh of approval. And guess what? I don't think Hodder ever regretted going ahead. And my brilliant editor, Catherine, said that when she got hold of the first copy of the book off the press, she held it to her chest, knowing what this book could mean to a lot of people. And that was a very, very heartwarming thing to hear about. The inspiration for How to Be a Bad Christian was Simon Barnes' book, How to Be a Bad Bird Watcher. You've probably heard of Simon Barnes. He was a writer, sports writer for the Times, and he's written in lots of different sort of places, many books, naturalist books particularly. But he wrote How to Be a Bad Bird Watcher. And, I was very interested by that book. As soon as I saw the title, I'm a very keen birder, as many of you know. And I quickly realized when I picked this book up that it wasn't like any book about birds I'd ever seen before. It was gloriously free from Latin names and that kind of stuff. It's really a work of pure enthusiasm in which the writer shows why bird watching should not be left in the hands of bird watchers, should not be left in the hands of geeks and twitchers, people with expensive binoculars and cameras and stuff, because, as he said, birds belong to everyone, not to this elite little group. You look out of a window, he says, you see a bird, you enjoy. Congratulations, you are a bird watcher. And following similar logic to the book, which, by the way, I recommend, How to Be a Bad Bird Watcher. It's a great read, whether or not you're into birds. In fact, that's the whole point of the book. But following the same logic of that book, I thought that it is a bad thing to leave God in the hands of religious geeks and twitchers, churchgoers, or, folk like me who make a living from God bothering. Because, like birds, God belongs to everyone. No one owns God or has a monopoly on knowing God or being able to offer access to God. And just as it makes no difference whether you know a coal tit from a blue tit in order to enjoy birds, so it also doesn't matter whether people attend church or read the Bible in order to experience God, or whether they know one end of the Bible from the other, because believe it or not, there was no Bible as we know it in the early church. Paul didn't go around preaching from the Bible in that sense. I mean, there were scrolls of the Old Testament, but it wasn't until the end of the 4th century, actually, that the Christian Bible, as we know it, was compiled. And do you know what? For most of church history, ordinary people haven't had access to reading it, either because it wasn't in a language they could understand or because they couldn't read anyway. So it was all down to what the priests, what the church functionaries told you that the Bible said. Now, I did intend, actually, in case you're thinking, I did intend to contact Simon. I remember when I was writing the book thinking, I must contact Simon Barnes and tell him that I've basically ripped off his title. Well, the whole idea of the book, actually, because that book is a tract for bird watching, just as my book is a kind of tract for, my love of Jesus, I guess you could say. But then when I launched the Bad Christians Manifesto, which was the book that came after this, at our church in St Luke's in North London, a couple of hundred people there, a very entertaining evening with lots of different acts and stuff going on, and quite a lot of free beer provided by the publisher. God bless them. And I was signing books, and there's a queue of people coming, and one lady came up and she put the book down. She said, "Could you sign this one to Simon?" And I don't know why. I said, "Simon who?" So she said, "Simon Barnes. I'm his wife." So I thought, oh, flip me, And I said, I have been meaning to contact Simon to tell him that I plagiarized his title. And she said, "Oh, really?" She said, "I thought he got it from you." So I said, no. Look at the dates of the beginnings of the books, And so I signed it to him, and bless his heart, he sent me back a little note. He's not a sort of religious person as such himself, but he sent me a note to say how much he liked the book and how flattered he was that I had, borrowed his title. Now, you see, I believe that there are hordes and hordes of people who never step foot in church, who have no interest in creeds and doctrines, who frankly find religion boring, yet who nevertheless falteringly live in the spirit of Christianity or true religion. So this is who I'm referring to as bad Christians, and who I primarily wrote the book for. It isn't intended for people who've got it all together and feel happy and settled with their experience of faith. That's fine for them. No, it's for what I call the disaffected faithful. People who may have been put off Christianity or just never attracted to it in the first place, but in their own way connect with what its essence is about. And you know what? Perhaps more effectively than many of us who claim to follow Christ. The basic idea of the book is pinpointed in the first chapter with the question of how much difference it makes if we consider the word Christian and we treat the word Christian as a verb instead of a noun. In other words, as a way of being in the world, a practice, instead of being a badge or a membership card for a religious club. I suggested that if we really follow it the way I see it in the Gospels, we'd see that being a Christian is much more about a practice rather than belonging to a club, or signing up to certain beliefs. And as I say, this is exactly what we find with Jesus in the Gospels. He made no mention of any required propositional beliefs. He didn't invite people to convert to a new religion. There's no evidence at all in the Gospels that he ever intended to start something called Christianity. He simply invited people to follow him. That was his constant call. Follow me, to be part of his way, to seek God's kingdom in the world. And to begin with, actually, his followers were known as people of the way before there was a word Christian. And that's what they were known by, I don't know, perhaps for 10 years or more after the crucifixion. And it was then, we're told at Antioch, that the word Christian, that they were first called Christians. And it wasn't as a result of a brainstorming session as they began to get their mission action plan together. It was probably a term of abuse or derision by the Roman authorities at Antioch, who blamed these Christ ones for the unrest that was going on in the city. They were seen to be the troublemakers, the bloody Christians. That's the kind of spirit of it. And the term Christianity actually only appeared around 100 CE or AD. And that was through Ignatius. He's the first person that actually coined the name Christianity. I suspect there are many, many people of the way in our world today who may not designate themselves Christians, may actually shrink away from the thought of that label. They're not even religious at all. And my desire in writing How to Be Bad Christian was to try to connect with those people. This is the kind of anonymous bird watchers, if you like, who don't have any of the expensive gear. It's people who are kind of in their own way following the spirit of Christianity without all the kind of trappings, the rigmarole. And to me, what I was trying to do is call people to realize the relevance and importance of Jesus, because I am, as I state in the book, an unabashed Jesus freak. I believe many people could or would connect with Jesus and with what he was about and what he taught if they understood him better, perhaps not through the lens of established religion and all that goes with that. I think if Jesus can be separated, it was Gandhi who saw Jesus as the greatest asset of Christianity. He wrote a little booklet called What Jesus Christ Means to Me. And part of that book is to, turn away from what he had experienced of the church and religion, but to say, actually, Jesus is someone who I follow. The story that opens my book about the funeral of Fast Eddie is typical of so many encounters with non-churchgoers that I have had and still do have from time to time at funerals, weddings, baptisms, etc., where generally afterwards in the pub I have amazing encounters and conversations with people who never darken the doors of church, but who clearly are hungry to hear the whole thing from a different, and I would say more progressive perspective. I can't tell you how many times people have said, if only I'd encountered you, when I was younger, or something like that. Um, I think, there's such a devastating trail of casualties from how people have perceived and how they've experienced the church or established Christianity in the past. I did ask at the funeral at the beginning of chapter 1 why this man was called Fast Eddie. I asked the family when I saw them, and nobody seemed to want to say. And so I put it out there when, to the public at the funeral. We were packed out in the church, hundreds of people that day. And on the way out, a woman told me, well, you see, Dave, he lived at a very fast pace. And then there was a guy behind her who said, nah, Dave, it's nothing to do with that. It's a case of the hand is faster than the eye, if you know what I mean. And I was told that the crime rate in Islington went down that day because there were quite a few, characters, should we say, in church that day to say goodbye to Eddie. And he was really one of the first of many what you might call dodgy characters whose funerals I took, including, as you probably know, 2 of the great train robbers, all of which led to the Independent newspaper dubbing me the villain's vicar, which, given the company that Jesus kept in the Gospels, makes me pretty happy. The second chapter of the book is also definitive of the rest of the book because I believe that we really can bump into God anywhere and everywhere, in the beauty of nature, in the pain and sadness of a funeral, in a cold beer on a hot summer's day, in a film at the cinema, in a painting at an art gallery or on a street corner, in the kindness of a stranger, etc., etc., etc. I could go on. As with most of my writing and communication in general, I do my best to wear my theology lightly. But make no mistake, I don't say very much in life without giving it some pretty serious theological and rational reflection. But the point is, most people can't be bothered with all that, with all the ins and outs of, Christology or soteriology, with epistemology or hermeneutics and all that kind of stuff. And yet, when such things are woven into real life situations and interpreted in the light of present day scientific and social understandings, I find that lots and lots of people are interested and hungry to hear about it. This is what I'm meaning by bad Christians. So when I talk about bumping into God all over the so-called secular world, I'm not being sort of, sappy and romantic about it. I have a big theology of creation and of God in creation. A theology of divine immanence, of God being present in the very fabric of creation, of panentheism, incarnation, sacramentality, and lots more big words that undergird the stories and the contemporary spirituality that I am trying to articulate and offer in the book. So why not take a little time this week to ponder, where you bump into God as you trundle through your everyday life? Because I'm telling you, you are bumping into God all the time, but probably often unrecognized, just as I do. Paul told the people at Athens at the Areopagus in Acts chapter 17, God is not far from any of us. God is not far from any of us. For, he says, in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your poets have said, for we too are God's offspring. I love that, because, and it's worth thinking about it. Paul clearly bumped into God himself in Greek poetry and wisdom, because that's what he's quoting there. It's interesting, if you follow Paul through the Acts of the Apostles, when he's talking to Jewish audiences, he almost invariably talks from the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament. When he's talking to non-Jewish people, to Gentile pagans or whatever, then he draws on creation, the God who made this, or in this instance, he draws on current literature, poetry from the time, which I find very, very inspiring. Um, so it's worth thinking that he's saying that God is in effect like the ocean in which we all swim and exist. It doesn't matter if people believe in God or they don't believe in God, they're still in God, in the circle of God's all-pervading presence. That's what Paul's saying. So just in the same way as it wouldn't matter if you're swimming in the middle of the ocean, you could be swimming around saying, I don't believe in the ocean. It wouldn't matter. That's not the point. The point is you're experiencing it. Excuse me. The third chapter of How to Be a Bad Christian is a favourite of mine, How to Love Your Way to Heaven. Kay, whose story I tell at the start of that chapter, was such a very gorgeous person. She probably still is, but I don't see her anymore. She had what I used a phrase from a Nick Cave song to say, she had a house big heart where we all dwelt. And, she, for all her wonderfulness, is not an aberration in the world. Yes, her generosity in opening her home to local waifs and strays, as I described, it was magnificent. And the way that she paid for Eric's funeral when he had no one else to pay for his funeral by having a whip around in the local block of flats where she lived. And then, because there wasn't enough, making up the difference week by week to the funeral director from her pittance of an income. It is stunning, stunning. But it doesn't, she's not the be all and end all. There is a lot of love in this world. I find it almost every day of my life, not just in the people I know, but people I meet. And that's despite, by the way, the horrible and hateful stuff which is out there too. And John tells us in the epistle of John that where there is love, there is God. Where there is love, there is God. That those who live in love live in God, he says, and God lives in them. Nothing about reciting the creeds or signing up to some doctrinal statement. No, what he's saying is if we experience love, then we experience God. Known or unknown, bidden or unbidden. When we experience real love, not squishy, pink, fluffy stuff, but real love, then we are encountering God, because John says God is love. A short while ago, I visited a man to help plan his husband's funeral. And we ended up talking for a long time. Once we'd planned the funeral, I thought I was going to be off and out there, but no, that's when the conversation really began. And he said to me how his husband had grown up with church and Christianity, but had abandoned it all when he realized that people like him, who were attracted to people of the same sex, were basically not acceptable in the confines of religion as he understood it, unless they gave up being gay, of course, which he knew there wasn't a cat in hell's. The man I was talking with, the surviving husband, was a beautiful, warm and sensitive man. He said to me, almost apologetically, that he didn't really know much about God. And I told him, actually, I think you know a great deal about God, maybe more than lots of the so-called God experts. From what I've listened to and what I'm picking up from you and what I'm seeing and sensing of you, I think you know quite a lot about God. You and your husband clearly loved each other to bits, and you're surrounded by people, family, friends and work colleagues with whom you experience an enormous amount of love and mutual care. You have already told me about the various charitable causes that you've both been involved with together. And all I can say is I would feel very proud if I were your father or your brother or your friend. And look, I said, one of the most universally resonant things that we can say about God is that God is love. Trust me, I said. You know God. Now go check it out. And he and his sister, who was also there, wept as we were talking about these things. I didn't think God's stuff was for me, they both said. You've made us think that maybe we've been wrong. And I think there are so many people in the same boat as that. Lovely, wonderful people. Yes, of course, you can focus, if you will, as the media tends to press us to, on all the horrible, hateful things in the world. But there's a lot of love in the world too. And where there is love, there is God. The key thing about the third chapter in How to Be a Bad Christian is that we can't love God in a vacuum. That's a key thing that I'm saying there. We can't love God by simply shouting praises to heaven, eyes closed, arms waving. God only ever comes to us incarnationally, by which I mean God only ever comes to us in some kind of material form. That's the central truth of Christianity, that God, in God's self, as it were, we can't see God. We can't know God in that sense. We know God when God is incarnate, when God takes material form. And so we love God and we experience God by loving other people. We love God by being grateful for the life that God's given us and its magnificent gifts. We love God by being kind, by being generous, by spreading beauty. We love God, and this may be the most challenging part of all, we love God by loving and being kind to ourselves. I said at the beginning that non-church going people were a key part of my target audience, and thanks to Hodder and my lovely editor Catherine, I have at least made good inroads to that audience with this book. Over the years I've received masses of emails and messages, letters. People have actually bothered to find my address and write me a letter from people, so very many of whom begin their letters or begin their emails or messages saying something like, I'm not religious, but. And it's that but, isn't it, which is the important thing. I'm not religious, but. Because they then go on to say how much they enjoyed the book and how much it changed their ideas about God and faith and stuff, how helpful they found it in their lives, and how surprised they were to find that perhaps they are more religious than they thought they were. So yeah, it's true that How to Be a Bad Christian and a Better Human Being is a kind of tract. When we launched it at Greenbelt in 2012, you may have heard me say this before, in a very muddy field in the beer tent, somebody said to me afterwards, wow, Dave, you were on fire tonight. You were like a liberal evangelist. And I think that, when the first person who read this book, when I'd completed it, actually was Pat. And I said, what do you think? And she said, it's the good news, Dave. It's the good news. And she says that as someone who's not particularly religious herself and finds that an awful lot of what's called good news isn't really good news at all. But she said, this is liberating to people. That's what I've wanted it to be. And so one of my favourites communications was from a woman who told me that her dad, who had never read a whole book in his 57 years, read this book from cover to cover and couldn't put it down. And you know what? It really don't get much better than that. So hey guys, time's up. Next week I'd like you to read chapters 4, 5 and 6, and we'll talk a bit about them next time. And please, if you have questions or comments, do send them to me. I'd love to hear from you. And anything you do send to me, I'll try to incorporate that in. Okay? So here is a prayer. Say yes to life. I long to learn the healing practice of pausing and noticing, of turning aside, of not hurrying by on the other side, but paying attention to the countless miracles of ordinariness. I don't know what to believe about angels, but I do know the world is overflowing with presence, with numerous dispatches of hope and empowerment, urging us again and again to say yes, yes to this one beautiful, irrepressible life of which we are a part. Amen. Well, a quick toast, I think, to all of that. If you've got a drink handy, I've got a little bit of God's own brew from the tap, but because I've got a little bit of a tickly cough. But if you've got anything there to drink a toast with, then I invite you to drink a toast to love and beauty and justice in the world, to life, l'chaim. So there it is for this week. Thank you very much for being with me. If you like the shed, you like what I'm doing here, you can support us by buying us a coffee. You just have to follow the link on the screen here. And lots of you do that, and we are deeply grateful for all the ways in which you support and encourage us in what we're doing here in the Holy Shed. So, what else have I got? Well, I'll tell you what, this week, if you missed the last Soul Space that I did last week, hey, the good news is I'm doing it pretty much the same again on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, 12:30 rather, lunchtime, courtesy of St Athelberger's. So I'll put up a link for that, and if you'd like to join us, be great. Nurturing the inner mystic. Lots of lovely stuff. Yeah, what else? Well, if this morning I did a talk at St Leonard's on the passage where Jesus says that if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross. Hard stuff, really. Not my favourite verse to be given to preach on. That's the beauty of the lectionary system of readings, that you don't always get to preach on your favourite text. But it's a great text, and you can hear the way that I understand and interpret that by listening to that recording of that, which will be posted very soon on the church website. And again, I'll put it up on Facebook. And there it is. Except, that Wednesday, I'm doing a pause for thought on Radio 2 on the Zoe Ball show. It's around about 7:15. Again, I'll post a link for it later if that's a little bit too early for you, or if you're on your way to work or whatever. So there it is. Thanks so much for being with me, guys, and have a great week. Do take care of yourselves. Be kind to those people around you, the people you love and the people that you meet along the way. Be kind to yourself. Stay human. And I'll see you soon. I'm going to finish with this blessing to some nice music.